And the aim of my presentation is to describe the main contribution of women's studies to multidisciplinary research. I will also suggest pragmatic ways of incorporating the feminist perspective at Pakistani universities. Finally, I plan to effectively exercise feminism of its sinister stereotypical image. In my presentation, I shall use women's studies and feminism as interchangeable terms. Women's studies of feminism first became a rigorous field of academic inquiry by removing traditional barriers to research through critique, by coining new academic concepts, which is essential to an approach becoming an academic discipline, and by widening the scope of the study of power distribution in society. One of the academic myths that feminism shattered was that the social scientist was an impartial observer who could objectively assess social phenomena. Feminism brought in subjectivity as an integral part of research. It also questioned the concept of difference, which meant the social behavior was no longer to be judged in terms of a single normal behavior and all other behavior as deviant, but also as no social behavior as simply different between groups and individuals. Yet the concept of difference has also stimulated feminist studies, and as it implied that there is a difference between the thinking and behavior of men and women that is manifest in several ways. For instance, in the so-called private or domestic space, women are socialized into being at the beck and call of men. Thus, women possess a basic interruptibility of their projects. Women become vulnerable to environmental influences, they are bound to change and not be in control of their world. Similarly, the concept of mothering plays an important role in this being used by women in waiting for change. Mothering includes catering for processes beyond one's control, as women recognize that over-controlling their children defeats the growth process, and consequently women adapt a waiting attitude quite opposed to the male trait of questioning. In practical terms, this means that female waiting and listening trait should we let the research materials speak to you rather than putting arbitrary interpretations upon it. Believers such as Iris Murdoch in the intrinsic difference between men and women state that women's judgments are based on the fundamental respect for the contingent order, for the environmental context, for the concrete everyday world. Women appear less willing to wrench that context apart or impose upon it alien abstractions or to use implements that subdue it intellectually or physically. A woman's ethic is non-imperialistic, life-affirming, and reverse the concrete details of life. In support of the contention that women are hyperactive of their surroundings, feminists would say that a woman has just to walk down the street without being aware of her surroundings, and she would be quoting physical abuse. Another example of the difference between the genders is that women see the world in terms of conflicting responsibilities and concern for daily needs rather than as competing rights. In this manner, girls see games in terms of continuing relationships and do not quarrel about rules, while boys seek winning in absolute terms, leading to hierarchical domination. Women have the nurturing instinct, men cut off interpersonal relationships to avoid falling victim to the Oedipal complex of over-attachment to their mothers. Aziza Al-Gibran states that women fear men because a woman can bleed and recover, and more importantly, reproduce herself. She has the key to immortality and he does not. Thus the man turned to production and imitation of reproduction and to technological innovation, which in turn gave him power. When men are freed of this fear of women, society will become more egalitarian. It is this egalitarian society that I would aim for, rather than a matriarchal world of radical feminists which gave rise to the stereotypical women's slipper. Maybe that was a necessity or a transitionary phase for rigidly patriarchal societies, for instance, the black society in the United States. Indeed, African American women critique the radical feminist generalization that access to productive work is denied to women, because that is the problem of the leisure class white woman alone. African American women are often the winners of their families, yet their communities are far from being matriarchal. The difference between men and women is also being questioned by scientific studies. As the socialization of men and women changes from a person's prenatal, school, and workplace atmospheres, the differences become muted between the traditional ways of men's and women's modes of thinking and reacting. There used to be a time when women in their private sphere would even look at their achievements in terms of what the men in their lives were achieving. For example, there's this story that एक दफा 3 औरतें बैठी थी और वो कह रही कि जी मेरा मियाँ जो है वो इतना बहादुर है कि उसने वो फुटबॉल खेल रहे थे उसने गेंद फेंकी तो वो पूरे कोर्ट से बाहर निकल गया दूसरी कहती है नहीं मेरा जो है ना वो उससे भी तेज है उसने गेंद फेंका वो शहर से बाहर निकल गया तीसरी कहती है मेरा जो हामिद है ना उसने जब बॉल फेंका 3 दिन के बाद वापस आया क्योंकि वो चांद पे चला गया था वहां से उन्होंने कहा हम दोबारा वापस नहीं सुनेंगे Women used to look at their, or still do in many societies, in terms of male achievement. For me, one of the most startling findings that I did in my readings was in the field of sports. Traditional sports, best represented by the International Olympic Games, have been competed in separately by men and women. Generally speaking, women are not as strong or as fast as men in sports on the whole. This is a fact. For example, women did not compete in marathon races 20 years ago. However, during the 20 years since women began running marathons at the Olympic Games, according to recent research, and I quote, they have reduced their finishing time by more than 1.5 hours. Women are expected to run as fast as men in that race by 1998 and might catch up with men's running times in races of other lengths within the next 50 years. Because they are increasing their fastest speeds more rapidly than our men. I will not dwell on the intrinsic difference between men and women, but merely state that given that women are newcomers to positions of power and the public workplace, they have brought, and that is an urban society of course, they have brought a fresh perspective to teaching methods as well. I now turn to these in a very specific manner. These methods include the theoretical issues of subjectivity in research, the use of emotion as a research tool, non-hierarchical ordering of power distribution, the concept of community and interpersonal relationships, and the empowerment of women and other oppressed people. Together they mean that the process is equally important to the end goal of social change for women and men alike. My typical classroom is co-educational and the underlying concepts are more important than overtly feminist methodology. I begin by stressing the importance of subjectivity in research. In fact, this is where I find my classroom to be different from the typical Western classroom that I read about. My students use the so-called Eastern subjective style in the first place. But usually this is generalized and passive polemics. It is very subjective but is polemical. The feminist perspective requires that the students express themselves in the first person singular, for instance, by saying I feel rather than we feel or they, women feel, and to differentiate between feelings and thoughts. This method forces the students to own their feelings and even recognize the body as a site of oppression. Feelings are thus sanctioned as regular parts of the feminist or women's studies classroom. So my instant student, my own Pakistani student, can say, they usually do say this, hum log, generally speaking, but once I make them own, do you personally feel this, then they sit down to think about what exactly are they saying, because they're personally identifying with their statements. Anger is a powerful emotion and is important for conscious raising to help us identify the source of oppression. In another classroom situation, students are introduced to unequal relationships, for instance, which is my typical scenario in political science, of a meeting between the foreign ministers of a small country, a regional power, and a global power, who are discussing a particular issue of, say, nuclear proliferation, or the issue could be human rights violations, or, say, illegal immigration. In this scenario, the students not only identify the source of their anger and force on which country is oppressed, but they also seek viable solutions for the problem. This form of theatre acting in a class requires eliciting responses from both player and audience, um, uh, and the questions asked at this juncture are: what is the meaning of this anger? Towards whom is this directed and why? What beliefs and judgments were implied by this response? What issues were thus raised? Alternatively, the scenario could be three students in a triangular relationship, say a man, his wife, and a third woman. And as the play continues in class, and the aim is to try and get students to feel angry, the questions that should be coming up are you angry at what? The man, his behavior, or the woman, or at society, or at the laws of the country? Another feminist concept revolves around non-hierarchical power distribution in social and administrative groups. Such leadership roles can instill in students skills for group participation in order to replace hierarchical leadership roles. Instead of groups of leaders and followers, which is how we usually organize classes, students could be divided into groups organized to share leadership. For instance, students could brainstorm to come up with the roles of coordinator, timekeeper, negotiator, focuser, summarizer, and so forth. For example, when one student or a group goes off on a tangential discussion, the focuser brings them back to the central topic of discussion. Similarly, when two students or groups become entangled in counterproductive discussion or conflict, the negotiator steps in to make them stop and listen to the opposing viewpoints and feelings. The negotiator, like the focuser, thus becomes the leader as the circumstances arise. Leadership roles could revolve for all the students. It is a skill that can be learned and is not inherently a personal trait. Process also includes the so-called female trait of inclusion, rather than exclusion for democratic representation. A feminist method for both inclusion and conflict resolution would be to make students paraphrase their opponent's viewpoint before presenting their own. They are then made to engage in dialogue rather than polemics to come up with specific solutions to problems. Alternatively, opponents exchange roles, for example, teacher and student. Used with discretion, I have found this method useful in weaning my students of the non-logical, polemical, and so-called Eastern style of speaking and writing. And actually, I owe this method to a man who is very important in my life. He said, he's my father who told me, child, when you're going to do research, always try and stand in the other person's shoes. And I didn't realize that this is a feminist method he taught me when I was a little girl. Students are empowered when they learn skills for effective methods that could assist them in the work world. One such method is cooperative learning skills. In this situation, the instructor chooses a reading which is divisible into parts that could be understood separately. Students are given a collective grade divided equally between members of the class, which means that if any one member has not adequately identified or summarized the main ideas, the other group members are also disadvantaged. This is a rather advanced method which I would suggest that you try later in the semester. Another feminist method for a graduate class aims at bringing out differences within a given group, society, or societal or national. For example, the difference between women on issues of race, class, age, physical ability, and so forth. In this scenario, students are given a text to read and then to play the role of a particular character, internalizing the feelings of the character. A short novel is advisable, such as Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Usually students develop and defend their particular characters with great sensitivity, especially if they have been previously exposed to the racial situation in the United States. To this exercise, students are not overburdened, as each has only to represent a segment of the novel and all have a storyline to fall back on. As the emotions become prominent in discussions among students, attention becomes focused on how the women in the book resisted oppression. The difference usually dissolves between the racially different actors and the black characters in the book, and the discussion moves on to the complex problems about resistance to oppression and, what is crucial for me, complicity in oppression. The question of what the characters do makes us think about what we would do under parallel circumstances, and constitutes an effective, empowering strategy. Collectively, these women's studies methods represent the application of the concepts central to feminist theory, in particular, subjectivity as desirable in the social sciences, conscious raising to identify sources of oppression, non-hierarchical egalitarianism via revolving leadership, and empowerment by learning about the ways and means to remove oppression. I've also found these methods to be useful because, simply based in Pakistan, maybe I teach at Qaeda University, yet the research material is rather limited, and I am forced to send my students out, and it's a healthy practice, to look for wherever they can find material. For example, in the class I've been teaching on Latin America, I usually teach US studies course, I have to ask them to go and look at pictures of the period that they are studying. Look at paintings, listen to the music of the period, because that's the only way they're going to find varied information. Although the problems raised, however, a feminist teacher should be aware of certain cautionary notes. These would be, although the problems raised concern the oppressive structures of society, feminist methods cannot, and under no circumstances, should not address them on an individual level. At the same time, the instructor must be aware of how the teaching material and discussions affect individual students, and not push them too far on issues they feel uncomfortable with, as they have a right to prevent emotional violence to themselves. And secondly, feelings alone do not solve problems. Sometimes we express anger to avoid addressing its sources. Sometimes we feel pity and distance ourselves from people whose problems are very similar to our own. This is sentimental and unproductive use of emotion. Let me stress that method in itself is gender neutral, and the concepts behind them help us achieve the goals of feminist priorities, namely awareness that women are equal or the major part of society. That basic thought alone would bring about a feminist methodology in the classroom. Thank you.